everyone, my name is Audrina and welcome to Road to JOVED. In this session, we're gonna talk about how to prepare for a major tournament. As you all know, we are here with VM, the first Indonesian to achieve triple crown in Worlds Thailand, EFL champion, EFL overall best speaker, and also EFL final best speaker. But that's not the top of the cream. Moreover, in his preparation, he also championed and topped the top of IIUM Open, the first Indonesian to do so. He's also one of the four Indonesians to be ABP Open quarterfinalists. And yeah, don't also forget that he also championed multiple classics and the overall best speaker of NUDC. So, with all this greatness and all of your achievements, what is your philosophy and your driving force that inspires you for training this hard to the point you can achieve all of this? Please explain it to us, VM.
Well, when I was training for Worlds, the philosophy that I operate on is the philosophy of David and Goliath. So I still remember it very clearly. I get this philosophy from a book by Malcolm Gladwell under the same name, David and Goliath. And what the book really explained in its opening is on the idea that your weakness can be a strength and your opponent's strength can be a weakness. And I really feel that, when you go to an international tournament, especially if you're someone from an EFL country, like, if you're Indonesian, for example, and if you're someone that don't have the best English, you have grammatical errors, you have limited vocabularies, and you also have problem with your institution because they don't provide the best coaching possible due to a limited amount of funding, and you are unable to go to international tournaments as often and as frequently as your competitor, the deck feels like it's very stacked against you. It really feels as if you're going against real giants, you're going against Goliath, and you're just a nobody. And that's how you feel generally in international tournaments. That's how I feel, at least to a certain extent. And so when I read that book by Malcolm Gladwell, when I read David and Goliath, I still remember the opening of that book so clearly on how he explained the story of David and Goliath, and he puts it into a very new light. I'm sure all of you know the story of David and Goliath, right? The story of an underdog shepherd that goes against a giant of the Philistine. But what is so interesting of that story, as told in the book by Malcolm Gladwell, is that we all think that Goliath is powerful. We all think that his giant size and his ability with weaponry, the fact that he can lift a sword that is so heavy that other people are unable to lift it, we all think that that makes him great. But what if behind that strength, what if behind that mightiness that he owns, what if that is actually a weakness? And that's what Malcolm talked about, right? The idea that Goliath is born with gigantism, and because he was born with gigantism, the impact is that his eyesight becomes very poor, and the impact is that he needs to have a steward bringing him from one place to another due to how bad his eyesight is. So what that show you is behind that great strength is a weakness. And it's a weakness that is ready to be exploited. And interestingly, we all thought of David and we all thought that, oh, he's weak. And of course, that's a sensible assumption to have. He's a shepherd while his brothers work in the army. He never went to war before. Presumably, according to the books like the Bible, he is weak and small in stature. So we assume that he is entering the competition. He's entering the battle between him and Goliath at a disadvantage, right? We thought that his weakness, his inexperience in the battlefield is a disadvantage. But what if that's not a disadvantage? What if that is actually a strength? Because that's the interesting part. Being a shepherd, David don't fight with swords. He don't fight with spears or, chainmail armors and shields and all that. He fight with a slingshot. Because a slingshot is what he utilized when he needs to kill lions and bears that try to take his sheep away from him. So slingshots might seem like a very weak and puny weapon if you compare it with, glistening armor and very shiny swords and javelins that are flying to your face. Now, it sounds weak, but interestingly, what Malcolm did in the opening of the book is that he found a research, and the research found out that an expert slingshot user can shoot a stone using the slingshot at a speed nearing the speed of a bullet. And that's insane. If you can shoot a stone at the speed of a bullet, obviously that stone is very powerful to the extent that it can kill someone and pierce through skin and bones. And what is so interesting is that David enters the battle with Goliath using his slingshot. And that slingshot is actually a very key part in taking down Goliath, because that is the inherent weakness that Goliath have. With a very poor eyesight and with a very huge body, that usually under melee combat, under a one-to-one battle where he thought that a battle between men to men should be a physical brute force battle, of course size will be a benefit to Goliath. Size means that he can swing his sword stronger, he can swing his sword faster, and that means the end for his opponent. But against an enemy that don't come in close to him, against an enemy that don't get closer to him, that don't try to fight mano a mano using hand-to-hand combat and sword versus sword, against an enemy that is at a distance, that shoot a stone at a speed nearing the speed of a bullet, Goliath, with his poor eyesight due to his gigantism, is unable to react quickly because of the combination of his size and his eyesight, and that's why he's defeated. The point here is your weakness can actually be a strength, and your opponent's strength can actually be a weakness. It's about how you set the playing field. It's about how you utilize the weakness, or the quote-unquote weakness, if I may, that you have, and transform it into a strength, while at the same time transforming the strength that is owned by your opponent into a weakness. And so that really becomes the guiding philosophy for me and Ilham when we are prepping for Worlds. I mean, the idea that yes, we are weak. Yes, to a certain extent, we don't have that good of an English compared to teams coming from EPL countries. We don't have the same amount of resources that, our colleagues and our peers have. We don't have the ability to go to every single international tournament out there. Doesn't matter, right? The weakness that we have, we need to transform it into a strength, and we need to make sure that we can pivot the strength of our opponent into a weakness that we can exploit. So overall, I think our philosophy is David and Goliath. We are David, they're Goliath. And just like how David and Goliath went out, David wins. And today, and that day, he beheaded Goliath, not with brute strength, but with cunningness, with trickery, but if I may, with an understanding of smarter strategy. And so that really becomes the guiding force, that really becomes the maxim of our preparation for Worlds.
Wow. Okay. So that is totally super inspiring. I'm sure all of us can relate to that feeling, that crippling fear when we thought we're not good enough, right? Especially when we are preparing for a major. But I'm sure that your achievements are also thanks to hard work. Can you explain to us how you train, especially since we are coming from Indonesia, who might not have as much resources as other countries?
Generally speaking, so I'm going to share my training model with you all. And I come from a privileged background, for sure. I come from a relatively well-off family. I come from a relatively well-off institution. I mean, it doesn't help me as much as other institutions did. But my institution, ITB, is a relatively well-off institution, and there are definitely many institutions that have it worse. So to a certain extent, my life experience can be better and can even be significantly better compared to other people. But at the same time, it's a matter of perspective. Despite my life experience being better, it's still significantly worse off compared to many other people that are significantly more privileged. There are many other people that have it much more in terms of resources, in terms of background, that have the ability to develop and the avenues to develop significantly more than I am. So the model that I'm going to be sharing with you all will take into account of that, especially because in Worlds, I'm not a privileged person. I am not someone that comes from a particularly privileged background where I can join lots of international tournaments. So I take into account that weakness and that lack of privilege that I have. And I hope it can translate to all of you that are watching this seminar as well. So that's basically a little caveat. So I have 7 points in my general training plan when I went to Worlds. There are 7 points. The first is knowing yourself. The second is knowing the game. The third is coming up with a training plan. The fourth is mastering your preparation strategy. The fifth is matter loading strategically. The sixth is mastering the execution. And the seventh is creating a healthy mentality. So that's the 7-step plan that I generally have. You do you have any particular questions on the 7 steps?
Please go on.
Right, cool. So do you want me to explain one on one, one by one, and go deeper on it?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So let's go one by one, right? On it. So the first step is knowing yourself. So this is something that I really get, and if you have read the book The Art of War by Sun Tzu, he said that if you know your enemy, you can win the battle. But if you know yourself, you can win the war, right? So the first step in every tournament is not knowing your enemy. That comes later. The most important thing is to know yourself. And this is very crucial. Even coaches have a limit on knowing yourself, right? Because coaches are not you. They are not the one that think when you are case building. They are not the one that think when you are doing the execution of your speech. That only comes from you. So only you can truly assess how you are doing. Coaches can give input. Coaches can give an assessment from the third party point of view. But from an individual point of view, only you can have that kind of assessment. So that's the first thing that I do together with Ilham. When we first met in preparation of Worlds, I still remember that was prior to the tournament of JDF, Jogja Debating Forum Open. We were prepping, and the first thing that we did is we talked, him and we try to know ourselves better. What do I mean by knowing ourselves better? It's basically two things. One is limitations, and two is strength. And this is very, very important because something that I see happens a lot with people that I've coached in the past is that they really focus either too much on their limitation or they either focus too much on their strength. So they either focus so much on the limitation that it becomes overwhelming, and it creates a very toxic mentality where they thought that they're going to fail because they think that this limitation is so overpowering that they're going to fuck up when the tournament comes, or they focus too much on their strength and it makes them blind to the limitations that they have. They become particularly arrogant, and as a result they are unprepared with different styles and different strategy and different tactics that the opponents come up with that particularly utilize their weaknesses. So we don't want that to happen in our performance in World. So what we did is we began by discussing what exactly are the limitations that we have, and we break it down because we want to cover those limitations through the training plan that we will later on create. And secondly, we discuss on what are the strengths that we have that we want to either emphasize, and we eventually want to make it overwhelming. We want to make our strengths so overwhelming that our opponents won't be able to deal with the strengths that we have. So that's the first part, right? And let me give you a couple of examples. So for me personally, when we first did this meeting with Ilham, the limitations that I have back at that point. So I was just finishing up from Cape Town. And something that I really realized in Cape Town is that one of the limitations, the biggest limitation that I have is I have a problem with word economy. I have many ideas in my head, and I can make layers after layers of argumentation, but that becomes useless because I cannot bring them all. And it would be one thing if I can just decide on which is important and which is not. But when you are in a top room inside of international tournaments or even national tournaments, you're going to face an opponent that also bring layers of arguments. And you're also going to face, especially in British parliamentary tournament, you're going to face 3 different teams. So the ability to be economic in your word usage is very important if you want to be able to deal with the materials that come from them, and if you want to be able to strategize eventually, right? And so that's the problem that I have. My words are not economical. So from the perhaps like 7 points that exist in my head, I might be able to only bring 4. And there are still 3 missing points that I need to give to my partner, or if I'm the later speaker, then I cannot give to anyone, but that's still problematic. So that's my particular limitation that I try to solve, word economy. Now, what are my strengths? My strength, as it happened, is that I happen to really read a lot. And so I know a huge amount of context. So because I know a huge amount of context and I know a huge amount of study keys, the question becomes how exactly can I frame this context and how can I utilize these study keys to be an overwhelming advantage over my opponents eventually. Now, of course, knowing yourself as the training goes on, I'm sure that you will improve. So knowing yourself is something that you need to do continuously to really upgrade how is it that you see yourself and to really upgrade what exactly are your limitations and what are your strengths going on and moving on. But that's how we began, right? My limitations was world economy, my strength was context. And Ilham have a different problem. Ilham, Ilham limitation is his structure. Now, Ilham is particularly good in creating compelling narrative, good in creating framing, but there's a problem in structuring that framing. So it makes his framing quite a hit or miss. So that's a particular limitation that he needs to deal with, right? How to structure his speech to the extent that all judges, regardless of their school of thought, can buy the framing and the narrative that he is employing and is creating. What are Ilham's strengths? Now, the thing with Ilham is that he didn't join as much debate tournament, but he spent a huge amount of time doing activism and doing political organizing. And that's a really great strength. So it gives him quite a nitty-gritty technical details on the ground that can really upgrade our performance because he can add a touch of reality into each cases. And that is a strength that we later on learn to make overwhelming against multiple opponents eventually. But that's the first step, right? Knowing yourself. Because it is only when you know yourself are you able to really realize where to target your practice, what limitations do you need to cover from your practice, and where to target your practice to make your strength become overwhelming eventually. So that's on the first step. Is there any particular question on the first step?
Okay, so that is very insightful, but how do you objectively assess your strengths and
Yeah.
weaknesses to the point you can analyze them? I mean, I think humans have tendency to create excuses or beating ourselves too much.
Yeah. That's a very fair point. Generally speaking, there are two ways that I employ when I'm trying to assess myself in the beginning, and this is a way that is also later on very useful as the practice goes by. The first is to see my past performances in tournaments. Now, here's the thing, right? I don't know about you, but I see that many debaters are particularly good stalkers of the tabulation of a tournament, right? People are like, oh, this guy got the overall best speaker, or this girl got the overall best speaker. And oh, why is it that you rank at number 50 in this particular tournament, right? I mean, people stalk the tab. And I'm not saying that stalking the tab doesn't give you a sense of euphoria when you get to be in the know. But the point is, if you want to stalk the tab, you might as well stalk your performance, right? So me and Ilham, so I'm a math student. I generally don't like math as much, but there are times when math is useful. What I did is that I take a look at all the tabulations of the recent tournament that I joined in like probably the last year or so, when I do this the first time. I take a look at all the tournaments that I joined for about a year, a couple of tournaments that I joined. I take a look at all the big ones, and I took all the aggregate of the data sample of all my performances. I take a look at which rounds do I get 80. I take a look at do I only get 77 or 78. I take a look at which round do I get the highest. I take a look at which round do I get the lowest. And I take a look at the motion, right? I recap and I revisit the motions that at which I get high and at which I get low. And I revisit the judges that give me those scores. And what that gives me is that it gives me quite an objective metric. It gives me a calculated mathematical number as to when is it that I'm performing well and when is it that I'm not performing well. So I eventually get to realize, for example, a couple of things, right? Oh, so as it happened, I perform really well in IR motions and in economy motions. And apparently, as I take a look at those scores, I realized that, and I watch my old performances that happen to be in YouTube, for example, I realized that in those motion, my world economy is pretty well. So does that mean world economy is a solvable problem that I can deal with? Comparatively, in more philosophical motions, my world economy is not as good. Or for example, when we're talking about overwhelming strength, apparently, while I do know a lot about, say, US politics, or I do know a lot about war and terrorism, apparently I don't know as much about feminism. And I'm going to discuss more about that on strategic method loading later on. But those are the kind of data that I get from taking a look at all my performances in the past and making it, basically making it somewhat of a graph, making it a table. You can make a function in Excel that take a look and really see at which point are you really doing well and at which point are you really not doing well. The second thing that you can do to really objectively assess yourself is record your performance. What me and Ilham did is that we gave a couple of PM speeches in the beginning. We take a recording of ourselves and we really see it. If you fear that you are not going to be objective, then have your teammate listen to it as well. Because, maybe you don't have a coach. And during the time when I started out my world's journey, when we are preparing to Thailand, we also don't have an official coach because we are the seniors in ITB. So we don't have a coach. What we need to do is that we need to coach the juniors instead. There are no one that is more senior than us. The alumni, they're already very busy at work at that point, so they can't really coach us much. So because we are the only one that are the available coaches, so we need to coach ourselves. So we really assess our performances and we take a look at the recording and we realize that, okay, I have this particular problem ABC, and we take a note of that problem through the recording that we have. So those are the generally two ways in which I try to know ourselves better.
Okay, that is actually very cool. Definitely something worth to try. We'll definitely check out my past tournament tabs after this, but maybe we can move on to the second point. I'm sure everyone is curious already.
Yeah, so the second point is knowing the game. So I know this sounds pretty basic, but I think a question that people often forget is what exactly is debating, right? What is debating? Because debating is a sport. And just like every sport, it is very, very important to really see what are the metrics that give you the win. And that's the thing. I think oftentimes, and I was a victim of this mentality as well, oftentimes people enter debating not understanding what they need to do. And this is a problem that even experienced debaters face. Debating is not a sport on who knows the most, right? It's not academic that way, that it's about who knows the most. As much as I want it to be about who knows the most, it's not. And debating is also not a sport about who speaks most beautifully. It's not a sport on which of us have the best English or have the best compelling narrative or which of us have the best stories to tell. No, no, no. Debating is a sport about who can convince the judge. So what it means is that knowledge, matter, manner, execution, all those are not the end goal of debating. They are the tools instead of debating that can be utilized to win the game. Think about it this way. So this is something, so me and Ilham, we like sports to a certain extent, Ilham especially, but we are not that good in sports, but sometimes we make up sport analogies to debating. And one of the things that Ilham made is about basketball. He's an avid fan of basketball. And it really struck a chord to me, right? So if you take a look at basketball is not a game of who can drill the best or who can do the best slam dunk or who can do the best layup or three-point shoots. No, basketball is a game on who can score the most points. Your dribbling or defending or layup or slam dunk ability, that will help a lot in scoring a point. But that is just a tool that you utilize in the purpose of scoring those points eventually. And debating is the same. So your manner or your knowledge, those are tools. Those are tools that you can either employ or not employ depending on the strategy that you are utilizing eventually. And so the next part that we did, therefore, in the second step, is that we try to dissolve debating into what it really is. How do you convince a judge? Generally, we come to two metrics. First is prep, second is execution. So we realized that at the crux of debating is about how do you prep in those 15 minutes in case building. And the preparation is the one that will determine the case line that you bring. It will be the one that determines the strategy at which you enter the debate. It will be the one that determines the style that you are trying to employ. It will be the one that determines which study cases that you want to bring. The execution is how you utilize what you get in prep and execute it to convince the judge. That's what debating is. It's prep and execution. Those are the two key building blocks that becomes the question on whether or not you're able to sell the case that you have to the judge, right? So that's the thing. We always put ourselves in the perspective of knowing the game. So this is particularly useful because sometimes when we don't like to do something, like for example, I don't like to read as much on feminism topic, not because I don't like feminism, but because I find it more boring compared to reading IR. But that can't work because if I don't read as much on feminism, I just shot myself in the foot, right? Same goes with Ilham. I mean, Ilham don't like to read as much on certain topics, such as, for example, European politics. But if we don't read about it, we just shot ourselves in the foot. So knowing the game is very important to put everything to perspective. Sometimes the things that you did is going to be boring. I mean, that's the thing. Every major tournament, if you see an Olympian athlete training, you will realize how boring it is. You know, you need to wake up early, do some practice, do some preparation. It's not gonna be an easy thing. It's gonna be very boring. But it's only when you know the game and you know what it takes that you are able to have the not only the courage but also the grit and the determination to push you further and to push you forward. So knowing the game is the very important second step.
Okay, that definitely opens up my mind because sometimes trainings become too saturated and technical to the point we forgot to look at the broader picture. I think this section is clear enough, so maybe we can move on to the third point of your training.
The third point of my training is coming up with a plan. So when we're talking about coming up with a plan, this is where resource get into the equation. Uh, Many people have asked me in the past, how exactly should we train if we don't have as much resources, if we don't have coaches, if we have limited funding to go to tournaments, if we have a time problem. So let me begin by telling you a little more about the context that Ilham and I have when we were preparing for Worlds. It wasn't easy. It's definitely not an easy thing. Me and Ilham, we come from a very demanding subject at ITB. I'm a math student. It's a very hard subject, to be honest. It's a very mind-boggling subject. Ilham is an architecture student, and he needs to spend hours and hours inside of the studio making models of buildings and making drawings of buildings and all that. So, in terms of time and energy spent, that's already a huge amount of energy spent inside of college, and we usually train late at night because that's the only time when we are available. That's the only time that we can spare, and usually we already come very tired. So that's a struggle. And not to mention, as I said earlier, there's a limitation of coach. The alumni that are more senior than us, most of them are already working. They are very, very busy, and we feel that it's really hard for us to be able to have continuous coaching for them because of how busy they are. So we need to coach ourselves, and there's no one else in ITB because we are the most senior individuals at that time inside of ITB. So it's really about coaching ourselves. So we have a coaching problem, and we also have a time problem because of how demanding our majors are. And the thing with ITB is that despite occasionally paying for our tournaments, because occasionally they do pay for our tournaments, they pay for our tournaments after the tournament rather than before. So if we want to join a tournament, we need to prepare our own money first, and we need to wait a couple of months until ITB pay it back. And that's not the case with all tournaments. Some of the tournaments ITB pay back, some of the tournaments they don't. So we need to always come to a tournament being ready to not have the money back from ITB. Sometimes we're lucky, and thank God, occasionally we get the money from ITB, but sometimes we don't. So there are definitely challenges there. So with that said, what me and Ilham did is that we optimize the resources that we have. And how do we do that? Generally, we create a training method that can be done with only just the two of us. Doesn't matter that there is no coaches, doesn't matter that there is no one to assess the debate, that's perfectly fine. And we want to create the training method to be as cheap as possible, to the extent that we need to pay like literally zero. So the only thing that we need is Wi-Fi, literally. So what do we do? Generally, it's the things that I can share to you is there are two things that is particularly useful for me in Ilham. First is 1 versus 1. How does a 1 versus 1 work? Basically, we simulate a semi-opening debate. I become opening government or opening opposition. Ilham becomes my opponent, either opening opposition or opening government. We take a motion. We take a 15-minute case building. I begin doing the speech, and the speech is recorded. Ilham then did his speech, and the speech is also recorded. And after that is over, we both listen to our respective speeches, and we both comment on each other performance. We take notes on each other performance. So, of course, at this point, perhaps a question that might appear in your head is, what if I don't have the ability to comment on my partner performance? Or what if my partner don't have the ability to comment on my performance, right? And I think that's a very valid question. And so occasionally, that is the case with me and Ilham as well. Occasionally, we don't have much to comment. And that's perfectly fine. So one, there's already a benefit there. If you realize a benefit there is that you are already training yourself and you're already training your partner to be able to critically assess one another. And that's a very, very important skill in British parliamentary, because your partner needs to have your back, right? Your partner needs to back you up. And the only way your partner can back you up is if he or she or they know exactly where you are lacking. So that's already a good practice in and of itself. But secondly, what we did is that after every 1 versus 1, we researched the motion, right? So we once did a motion on NCAA, and I don't know much about NCAA. Ilham knows a little, but he's also confused as to how we could approach the motion. So after the debate is done, we research the motion, and there's a benefit there, right? You already know how the debate will play out because you have done the debate somewhat. So you know at what areas and at what angles do you need to do the research, and your partner also know at what areas is it that they need to do engagement to the other side. So your research becomes significantly more targeted. So at the very worst case, even if you don't know the debate tactics or you don't have a debate constructive, you already have a matter upgrade because you upgrade your previous debate performance with the new matter that you just researched after doing the motion. And that's something that I don't see many debaters doing, to be honest, because oftentimes we see many debaters and they're just like, one and done. What I mean by one and done is that they did a motion, and after they debated a motion, that's it. They don't even research after the motion, and that's what we don't want to do. We always research after the motion so that we know that when that motion comes up again, or when there are similar motions, we already know exactly what are the case line that we can bring, and most importantly, what are the factual case line that we can bring. Because if our opponents don't research and they bring very unfactual stuffs, it becomes very easy for us to bring the facts to the table and kick them out of the debate. So that's one. The second thing that we do is that we do the 2 versus video strategy. What it basically means is that me and Ilham, we became a team and we battle people in YouTube videos. Not online debates, no, YouTube videos. So what we did is that we opened past YouTube videos. If you go to YouTube, there are literally dozens, if not hundreds of debate videos. And a huge amount of that are very good videos. You have videos from Worlds, you have videos from UADC, from AVP, Australs, Euros, Round Robin. A huge amount of debate videos there. And these are speakers that are by magnitudes better than us. We don't go to the open final of Worlds. We don't even break open in Worlds, right? No one in Indonesia has ever broken open in Worlds. So if there are dozens of debate videos of people who broke open in Worlds, and that's something that no Indonesian ever did, doesn't that mean that they did something better that we don't do? And if you get what that means, is what we eventually did is we simulate being in that chamber. So for example, let's say me and Ilham, we want to practice opening opposition, right? So what we did is that we played the video, let's say it's a round robin video, and we see Prime Minister comes in. So me and Ilham has 15-minute case building done. And so after Prime Minister comes in, Ilham will enter as leader of opposition. And after he deliver the rebuttal and bring his arguments as leader of opposition, we will then play the video and see what the leader of opposition did. So we will compare Ilham's performance with the performance of the leader of opposition and see where is it that Ilham did well and where is it that the leader of opposition in the video did better. Is it that the leader of opposition brings more rebuttal? Is it that the leader of opposition bring a different framing to the same points that we have? Is there any particular argument that the leader of opposition in that video that happened to break Worlds bring that Ilham didn't bring? So we take notes of that, right? So at that point, Ilham has just gotten an input as to how he can be a leader of opposition that break open in Worlds. So he basically just got coached by a YouTube video of an Open Breaking Worlds finalist. Then what we do is that we play the deputy prime minister, and then I come in. I come as deputy leader of opposition. I engage with him, and I try to brought extensions, and I try to brought strengthening framing to the leader of opposition that we watch in the video. And then I compare it with the DL of the actual debate and how he performs better than I do, or how she or they perform better than I do, right? So we take notes there. So what that means is, okay, maybe you don't have a coach. Maybe you have faced the same problem that we do, that no one is there to coach you. That's fine. You can have world-class coaching from YouTube videos, and the only thing that you need to do is just a good internet connection. If you don't have a good internet connection, just go to a cafe, brought some hot tea, spend 3 hours there, and download 20 debate videos. You'll probably have it set for the rest of the month. So that's what we do, right? I mean, sure, they don't coach you the way, say, they don't coach you the way they say, okay, please bring this argument, or please bring this rebuttal, or you are facing problem in ABC. They don't do that. But just by comparing yourself with their performance, that is already a coaching, because you know what exactly that they do better than you. So it's fine that they don't give you direct feedback. You are already getting an indirect feedback from their performance. So maybe we don't have a coach, but our coach are world-class speakers. Our coach are giants that come before us, and that really helps out. So that's on planning, right? You need to find a plan utilizing the resources that you have, and you can come up with great plans, very great plans, using very limited resources eventually. So that's a little on planning. Yeah. Is there any question?
Okay, so that is actually very innovative, especially since it needs very little resources. But I'm actually curious because sometimes when there's no coach, no one that told you how it's supposed to be done, there are, of course, disagreement, and your discussion sometimes becomes convoluted,
Yeah.
like the blind leading the blind. Have you ever experienced this?
Yeah. That makes sense. I think there is indeed a risk of it being the blind leading the blind. I think one of the best way to solve that particular debacle is, the thing with debating is that it's not an exact science, is it? It's not like math, right? Debating is not a 1+1 = 2 scenario. So there are multiple styles and there are multiple approach to debating. And when we are watching videos, we realize that those styles are really seen. I mean, I've seen seniors from Singapore, for example, Singaporean debaters, senior Singaporean debater that are very matter heavy in their approach. I've seen teams coming from Tel Aviv that are also very, very heavy in their matter and creates very complex cases that are, very powerful. And then I've seen teams that try to create cases that are designed to be powerful and yet simple. So they focus on the simplicity to make sure that it moves as much individuals as possible. Point being, there are so many different styles. So there are not necessarily a correct style. It's more of a question on what do you need, right? So one, assess your problem. What's your problem? If my problem is world economy, then the best videos for me to watch are videos of people that solve world economy problem. I mean, if I may give an example, everyone, at least most debaters that I meet, they know of the Thessaloniki World's Final, right? They know of the, Madam Chair, the global poor all around the world live under dictatorship. They know that stuff, right? That stuff is known, right? What Boseo did, it's known. But what if I told you that what Boseo really did well isn't just his manner, or isn't just how charismatic and memorable his speech is, but his word economy? I rewatched the Thessaloniki final, and I realized how economic Boseo's words are. He created a case that are filled with layers after layers after layers, to the extent that his deputy Fanelli can be really strategic in picking the layers that Bo has brought, because there are just so many layers that his opponents will be flustered and flummoxed, and it's just so easy to rebring and reframe the layer into an angle of attack. So he became a very, very good approach when I'm trying to become more word economical. When Ilham is trying to be more structured, what we search are videos of people that are very structured. You watch the Thessaloniki final, don't just watch Boseo, watch the full debate. And you will realize that the closing opposition, specifically opposition web, have a very, very great structure as a web. And that's a structure that is really commendable. And that's something that Ilham really learns more, even though he's an initial speaker, as to how he can structure his performance better. When we're trying to make our examples and our study keys and our knowledge overwhelming, we watch videos of people that are able to make their examples and knowledge overwhelming. We watch, if you are familiar with Sheng Wu Li, in his finals on the Horrors of War, he didn't win that final. The one that win is the closing opposition, and the closing opposition brought a very powerful framing regarding how he utilizes study cases to make the framing so impactful and so overwhelming. We take a watch of it, we literally make a verbatim out of it, and then we take a look at how exactly, through the verbatim, we take a look how exactly did he do that, and that becomes a way for us to really improve our study keys. So again, know your limitation, know your strength, and the plan that you come up with, the 1 versus 1 or the 2 versus video in a full Euros or Worlds debate, that can really help in stepping up your game eventually.
Okay, that definitely clears up a lot of things, and I can't wait to try it out with my partner. But before that, of course, we have to talk about the next step. So please, VM, tell us your fourth step.
Right. So the fourth step is mastering the prep strategy, right? So every motion is different. And every opponent is different. Every judge is different. Judges come with different demands. Opponents come with different tactic. Every motion come up with their different demand. But that those are things that are to a certain extent beyond our control. I can't control who are the judge that I'm going to get. I can't control who are the opponents that I'm going to go up against. What I can control is the things that are within my hands, and that is one of them is prep strategy. So what we need to do is we need to master our prep strategy. I personally think that 50% of debating happens in the case building. So what me and Ilham did is that we did case building drills. So again, with the sports analogy, if you take a look at great basketball player, they don't just play matches. They don't just do basketball battle, basketball spars against one another. They isolate their training, right? They do focus drills. They do dribbling drills. They do shooting drills. They do slam dunk drills. But they do drills that are isolated, and we did the same. We isolate our drill. Specifically, we isolate our case building drill. So what did we do? Well, what we did is we case built a lot, and we case built a huge amount of motions. So sometimes, whenever we read an article, because we happen to read a lot, I think there was a point where me and Ilham, we read about 20 articles a day, 10 to 20 articles a day. And so what we did is behind every article, we imagine, what if this is made into a motion? And if it is made into a motion, so what are the arguments that's going to happen, right? So we did a huge amount of case building drills. We might not be able to join every single tournament out there, but for every tournament that appears, when we find out that the edge score is going to edge score in Worlds, we take a look at all the motions and we case build them one by one. And that's a good thing. It gives us a huge amount of arguments and case building and also strategic approach in our head, but it also gives us the ability to understand each other as a partner better. I mean, for me personally, one of the biggest challenges as an EFL speaker is it's really, really challenging to make, not only a good case, but a coherent case that are, powerful in its execution. And for me personally, one of the way to do that is that I need to write more. But a key challenge that I face in the need for me to write more is, I need more time. And I only have 15 minutes. So the question becomes, what exactly can I do with the limited time that I have? And having a better case building drill, it really boosts my opportunity to be more efficient in my communication with Ilham. So it went to the extent that, in some debates, we can go things like, Ilham, I'm going to bring the capitalist argument. And Ilham will already be like, okay, I know. So yeah, that's it. We can already directly begin writing. So that really makes our case building much more efficient. Ilham can go and say, VM, I'm going to bring the leftist argument on value of work. And I'll be like, okay. So he doesn't need to explain it any further to me because I already know what exactly is going to bring. And I already know that I need to prepare certain tactics and certain framing to make that powerful. So that is on mastering our prep strategy. We really master how exactly are we going to approach motion by debating a lot. And it also creates many other things, such as, for example, if we are out of ideas, what can we do? Okay, if we're out of ideas, we underline the keyword of the motion, we define the keyword, and we break down the keyword technically, and we find from that technical angle a point that we can run. Or for example, we analyze who are the actors of the motion, and from that actor, we basically, what we do is that instead of case building, we will, matter vomit a huge amount of knowledge that we have on the actor, and from that we crafted an argument. Those are prep strategy that basically talks about 50% of your performance, and that is something that me and Ilham heavily try to master. So that's the fourth step.
I think I'm starting to see how the identifications from part 1 and 2 blend together to create a powerful training plan, and how does it impacts your journey with Ilham in the fourth plan. And now I think we can move on to the fifth plan. I'm excited for that.
So the fifth plan, and I think this is actually my favorite part, is matter loading strategically. Me and Ilham, we come from ITB, and our alumni, the seniors before us, they read a lot, and I really like reading. Ilham really like reading as well. We also like watching lectures of professors talking about their subjects. I mean, matter and knowledge, it's something that we really find precious, and it's something that we really enjoy. I mean, I really enjoy discussing matter with friends and being corrected if I have a wrong understanding of matter, or telling the right understanding of matter that I have to people who don't know. I really enjoy that. So I really think that this is something that we can share quite a lot on. So our alumni and ourselves, in fact, before we begin Worlds, we all read a lot. I mean, a huge amount of people in ITB read a lot, I think, to a certain extent, because there's a limit to the amount of time that we have in ITB, and there's a limited manpower as well. So we can't just have, okay, I want to practice tomorrow. Can we have 8 people to do a BP session? We can't. Sometimes we don't have a manpower. There are generations in ITB debating where we literally have only 2 individuals that continue debate out of a single generation. So because of the manpower problem, hosting debate practice isn't as easy as it is. So what we need to have is, if I can't out-practice my opponent debate-wise, then at least I need to be able to out-matter them. So that was a maxim. That is already a maxim for practices, even when I enter ITB as a first-year student. However, this is a strength of me and Ilham. This is a strength of our past alumni. This is a strength of us as an institution, if I may. But that's not enough. If the secret is only matter, then we could have won a long time ago, but we didn't. So there is something that we need to tweak a little bit to make our advantage here become something overwhelming. So how do we do that? We do that by matter loading strategically. What we do are 2 things. One, we review shatter point issues, right? What is a shatter point issue? So me and Ilham, we read the news daily. Ilham have newspaper subscription. We also, every time we wake up, we open BBC and we read the headlines quickly. And when we are commuting to campus, we usually listen to podcasts, or when we are having breakfast, we watch CNN on TV. So we know what happens in the world, but that's not enough, is it? Right? Because I hope most people know what happened in the world. I hope that's the case. So it's not enough for me to just know what happened in the world. I need to be deeper. But then the question becomes, how exactly can you know deeper, and how to make that strategic in debating? So that's what the first part is about. What we do is that we create what is called a shatter point issue. What a shatter point issues are basically issues that are hot and relevant. So it's basically trending issues, but 2, and most importantly, debatable, right? An issue can be hot but not debatable, and vice versa. An issue can be debatable but not necessarily hot. So we create shatter point issues that are both trending and debatable, and we review it. So let me just give an example, right? I'm not gonna give the example of Worlds because Worlds has gone quite past, and many of the Shatterpoint issues back when we were preparing for Worlds is not necessarily as relevant. But let me give an example. Recently, myself and Ilham, we joined a tournament called Atma Open. We are of different teams. I joined with an UI kid named Atfikri, and Ilham joined with an UGM debater named Haikal. But we still understand about Shatterpoint issues, and we review Shatterpoint issues. So we both enter the finals of Atma Open, and we basically have the Shatterpoint issues at our hand. What are these Shatterpoint issues? One, police brutality. Because in the run-up to Atma Open, what happened is the death of George Floyd. What happened is the demand to defund the police. So police brutality is a very big Shatterpoint that can be very, very debatable. There are arguments for and against defunding the police. There are arguments for and against abolishing the police and just reforming the police, for example. There are concerns, for example, and what we did is that we realized, okay, police brutality is a Shatterpoint, so we really need to research on it. Because it's not enough for you to just know that, oh, George Floyd died and that's because of police brutality. Everyone knows that, all right? If you don't know that, there is a problem with you. But what you need to know are the key questions. So what are the key questions if we are talking about police brutality? One, what are the solutions to solve police brutality? Okay, some people said it's reform. Some people said it's abolishment. Okay, so what are reforms? Oh, reforms are things like body cam. So you put body cams in your body as a police so that we can find information and data if you happen to use brutality. Or two, for example, we need to weaken the police union because the police union are the one that are protecting the police, for example. Or third, we need to make sure that the police are not investigated by the police as well. Because if brutality is investigated by the police, then what's going to happen is collusion. And that's the reason as to why many police gets out of justice, right? So now that we know that, so we know now how it's said that we can do reform. All right, what are the critiques against reform? The critiques from the abolitionists are apparently that this is quite an institution that is simply far too toxic and far too entrenched that we cannot reform it. Or two, that the collusion happened not only between police, but also the legal system, so we can't just necessarily escape and abolish all of it, for example, right? Of course, now that we know that there's a debate of reform versus abolition, next question that appears in my head is, okay, let's say I abolish the police, how exactly can we achieve safety, right? So that's where we need to find study cases. Are there study cases of countries that have a weak police force, if an inexistent police force, and are still able to be safe? We find study cases about Camden, for example. Camden defund the police force, but then again, they then remade the police force, so they are not abolishing the police, they are just simply destroying the old one and creating the new one. So we ask the question, is Camden necessarily a relevant example in debates of abolishing the police? Nonetheless, we take a look at the key nitty-gritties. Apparently, the police in Camden is weakened and the funding goes to social service workers. They are going to not a reactive fighting crime strategy, but a preventive fighting crime strategy. And there are also cases, for example, what if there is a case of, a certain type of crime that can be solved better by psychologists rather than by police? So we take notes of that. So basically, understanding what a Shatterpoint issue are gives you and necessitates you to not only understand the issue, but ask the key questions regarding the issue. It's not enough to just know about police brutality. You need to know about which one is more strategic? Is it reforming or abolishing the police? How do you argue for both of it? Two, if you abolish the police, how exactly will safety work? Are you going to do a community policing? If so, how exactly is community policing going to work? Or C, what are the political aspects behind police? I mean, what are the strength of the labor union or the Republican and the Democrat? How many of them support reformation? How many of them support abolition, right? So don't just read, go deep into it. How do you go deep into it? Analyze the Shatterpoint issue. Imagine if this were to become a debate, what are the questions that you need to prove for either side? What are the questions that you need to prove to win? So your researching and the articles and the journals that you read will be much more strategic. So that's an example of how you can analyze a Shatterpoint, right? Another example of a Shatterpoint when we are going to Atma Open is cancel culture. J.K. Rowling just recently wrote out a transphobic remark, and there are attempts to cancel J.K. Rowling. So me and Ilham, we did our own research. We tried to analyze Shatterpoints, for example, where exact cancel culture, who are the people that were canceled, right? Is it fair for us to cancel them? What are the remarks that cause them to be canceled? Furthermore, we thought about, okay, what if we are on the other side? It's quite easy to argue that we need to cancel someone. What if we need to argue on the other side? We research, for example, are there people who are canceled for things that apparently turn out to be fallacious? Are there people who are canceled over fake news or fake claims, for example, or fake tweets? Are there people who are attempted to be canceled because of something that happened 15 years ago and they've significantly changed? Or are there people that are canceled because it's a setup, because it's a trap? Apparently, these cases exist. Apparently, there are people who are canceled for something that happened 15 years ago and they've significantly changed since then. Apparently, there are people who are canceled because it's a setup. Okay, so then the question becomes, are we able to use it in a debate? Vice versa, if we are to use it in a debate, how do we bring this in an equitable manner? Because we do not want to offend anyone. Vice versa, if you are from the other side, how do we deal with the possibility that the cancelers are wrong and the things that you are canceling is a false thing, for example, right? How do you deal with that? How are we able, for example, if we are attempting to cancel someone, to really decide and assess whether or not these individuals are worthy of canceling? There needs to be a mechanism there, right? A mechanism on how exactly can we do an objective cancel culture that truly cancel the people who deserve to be canceled and not the people who are set up to be canceled, right? We need to distinguish the two to make sure that the cancel culture, if you're defending it, are truly targeting the evil person or targeting the people who deserve it. So those are, key questions that appear from the Shatterpoint. So the point is, when you read an issue, read it through a debate lens, analyze it. If it's a Shatterpoint, analyze it as to what are the questions that can appear from it, right? So that's on part one, basically, analyzing the Shatterpoint, because there are questions and there are study cases that will appeal. Some of it might be useful, some of it might not be useful. If you find out, for example, people who are set up to be canceled, is it truly useful to bring it in a debate? Is it going to be offensive for you to bring it into the debate? Those are questions that you need to be considering. So don't just read. Reading is the bare minimum. Analyzing it and reading it deeper, that's what it takes if you truly want to excel and if you truly want to make matter your overwhelming strategy. Secondly, the second part of matter loading strategically is that we attempt to find the gaps in our knowledge. So the thing is, we have gaps in our knowledge. Ilham knows a lot about city building and Indonesian politics. I know a lot about US politics, IR and economy. I don't know as much on feminism. I don't know as much on LGBT rights, etc. So what I do is I read significantly more on it. So it went to the extent that I even went and I read works from second wave feminists. I take a look at history of feminism. I take notes of who are the first wave fighters, what do they believe on, who are the second wave fighters, what do they believe on. I don't know much about LGBT issues, so I went deep and I read about the RuPaul Drag Race. I read about the commercialization of the LGBT wave. I read about the commercialization of the Pride Parade. What are the impacts of it? What are the shatter points inside of it? The point that I'm trying to make here is, oftentimes we are trapped into liking certain issues, and that's not bad, right? It's normal to have a hobby, and definitely me and Ilham, we still read a huge amount of the things that we are good at and the things we like. And that's good. Keep it up. That can be a strategic edge that you can deploy against your opponent. But it is equally as important to find the gaps in your knowledge for you to fill. Don't just read the things that you are good at. The things that you are good at, upgrade it to the next level. But the things that you are bad at, that's the things that you need to patch up to make sure that you are ready to whatever motion that is thrown at you. So that's the fifth part, matter loading strategically. One, know the shatter point. Two, find the gaps in your knowledge to make sure that it's closed so that you are not only reliant on certain matters only.
Okay. But VM, I also noticed that you read a lot, right? And there might be some opportunity cost because when you read a book, uh, you spend more time and energy on it. Do you implement the same strategy on deciding what book to read as well?
Yeah, to a certain extent, yes. When it was prepping for Worlds, me and Ilham, we strategized on what exactly are the books that we need to read. For example, Yuval Noah Harari made the book 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. That's actually a pretty good book for debating. It spans a huge amount of topics. So Definitely a very, very good book, in my opinion. The Freakonomics writer, Stephen Dubner and Stephen J. Levitt, they made a book, Think Like a Freak, and that's a very good book to create a thinking cap strategy in approaching motions. Noam Chomsky is a personal favorite author of mine. He made the book Global Discontents, and it spanned US politics and IR and several other issues as well, especially social movement, especially leftist and anarchist social movement. So, point is, when you read a book, in my opinion, if you want to go deep into a topic, do that for topic that you are lacking. And for the others, you find books that go deep, but also can span multiple subjects.
Ah, I see, I see. So to sum it up, we have to create questions of trending and debatable topic that definitely helps us to research better, and it will be also be less overwhelming because you're not heading to the research blindly. So I think we can start to talk about the sixth on
Yeah.
the training.
The sixth part is mastering the execution. There are generally two parts. So what I mean by execution is basically how you perform, how do you speak. I'm talking about things like speed. I'm talking about things like diction. I'm talking about things like vocabularies. I'm talking about things like emphasis, manner, framing, and all those kind of stuff. There are generally two things that me and Ilham did. One, we ask one another to assess. We record our speeches and we ask one another to assess so that we can get a clear assessment, right? Because sometimes we are blind. Sometimes we think if we are the one that assess ourselves, sometimes we think that it's either really bad or it's either really good, right? But what your partner can do is that because they are not, they don't have your ego. So what they did is they're going to provide a much more objective and much more honest assessment on how exactly you are performing. So that's the first part. The second part is don't be afraid to repeat your speech. And this is very key in improving for me and Ilham. So Ilham sometimes stutter. I have problem with my word economy. But it's not enough to just know that, all right? It's not enough to just, we did a speech and we assess it and okay, you have stutter here and there, or your second argument is not economical in its word usage. That's not enough. That's just knowing it's a problem. That's not solving the problem. And for us personally, one of the best way to solve the problem is by repeating the speech. So there are times when I repeat my speech until 3 times. There are times when Ilham repeats his speech until 3 times as well. So we did that a lot. And to be honest, it's gonna be draining. It's gonna be very tiring. It's gonna be very, very boring. It's gonna leave you very, very tired. And it's an arduous thing, but we understand that it's important because after all those practice, after we did the huge amount of repetition again and again every day, at that point we happen to have a debate practice with more than just the two of us. There's Kushai there, and Kushai said that my word economy improved significantly and Ilham doesn't stutter at all. That is progress. And progress takes hard work. And the hard work that we have at that point is we should not be afraid to repeat our speeches. And I agree. I agree it will be tiring, but reward yourself if you have done that very tiring part. Of what me and Ilham usually did is, after repeating our speech again and again, because that's the thing that we can do. We went to a good restaurant. We eat a very fulfilling meal. We had a very fulfilling dinner, or we watch a movie together. I mean, that's the kind of thing that we did to reward ourselves. It's tiring for sure, but you will definitely see improvement. Because that's the thing, right? If you only know what's wrong, but there is a gap, say today and next 2 days until you practice again, that's a gap where the thing that you do wrong will still be habituated in your head. What you need to do is you to break that habit, and the best way to break a habit is to put another habit on top of it. How do you put another habit? Repeat the same speech, but bring the new habit into mind. So that's how you can master the execution so much better. Finally, we find inspirations. I mean, me and Ilham, we were Team Indonesia for World Schools Debating Championship at Stuttgart, Germany. And when we were prepping for World Schools back then, we still remember it quite distinctly. Our coach back then, KOD, telling us that, it's not only debaters that can be a good public speaker. So what me and Ilham did is we find public speakers on the internet that happen to be able to inspire us in how we can deliver points better. And Ilham did this quite a lot. He watched a huge amount of TED Talks, and what you see in many TED Talk speakers is they really are able to convey their ideas well. So that's something that we learn as well. We try to inspire ourselves by watching those kind of videos. And when we realize that, oh, our performance in that particular debate can be improved with this video, what if you repeat it? Again, don't be afraid to repeat your performance. Repeating your performance can be a very good key to success because you're creating a much better habit, a much better execution out there. Because the last thing that I want to note in this particular step is, to a certain extent, execution is the subconscious. All right. There are things when you're speaking, it's not conscious to the same way it's conscious when you're writing. If I'm writing something, typing things on my laptop, I can really take a look at how my words flow. I can really take a look at how, which diction and which vocabulary that I use. I can delete, I can backspace, I can copy, and I can cut. That cannot work inside of a speech. To a certain extent, when you're speaking, it's subconscious, right? It's subconscious on how you speak. It's subconscious on which vocabularies do you like to use more. It's subconscious on whether you like to do an active or passive way sentences. It's subconscious on whether you are deductive, where you put the conclusion first, or you are inductive, where you put the conclusion later. That is subconscious. So because that is subconscious, the best way, if you want to change it, is that you need to do it so much and that you are making a new habit to replace your old subconscious into a new one. That's why, in order for us to master the execution, we really need to repeat our speech again and again. So that's on mastering the execution.
I totally agree with that because I think repetition is very important to habituate yourself. So I think we've grasped your journey to multiple major tournaments. Thank you so much, VM, for sharing your training recipe. It has been a very insightful and inspiring story. But last but not least, the very important yet oftentimes forgotten part, creating a healthy mentality. How do you exactly do that when there's so much thing to do and so much thing to fix?
Yeah. To be honest, well, it's something. So this is something very, very good that Ilham shared with me, and I think this apply to life as well. And this is something that Ilham shared to me. Uh, when when you are focusing too much on the present, see the future. When you are focusing too much on the future, see the present. Right? It sounds paradoxical, but let me explain how it works. So when you're focusing so much on the present, let's say you are trying to solve a problem, right? You are trying to solve this stuttering problem that you have. See the future. See the future and think, all right, for example, what time is it? It's the 5th of August. If you're prepping for NUDC, you still have almost a month, right? If you face a problem of stuttering, see the future. See NUDC and realize that there's still a month. You have time, right? If you are preparing for JOVED, see the future. You realize that there are months until November and JOVED comes in. You have time to do it. If you are preparing for Worlds, see the future and realize that, oh my God, I have I don't know, 6 months more until Worlds. So when the present becomes too overwhelming, see the future and realize that, one, you are focusing for something big. You're focusing on the gold at the end of the rainbow. And two, because you focus on the future, there is time indeed. But secondly, when you're focusing too much on the future, when the future becomes so overwhelming, take a look at the present. Because if you focus on the future, let's say you are focusing to NUDC, and then you go like, oh my God, it's only a month until I meet teams that have years and years of experience ahead of me. Or, oh my God, it's only less than a year until I meet teams that come from an English speaking country that have already joined Worlds multiple times before me, and I've never joined Worlds before. That's gonna be very challenging, right? That's gonna be a very big pressure. So when the future becomes too overwhelming, take a look at the present and take a realization of how much you have grown right now. Take a look at the present and realize how much you have improved as a speaker, how much you have improved as a debater, and take a look at how much you have benefited from the training that you did, and take a look at things that are within your control. You can't necessarily imagine yourself getting the government funding to go to Worlds because you enter the grand final of NUDC right now. That's fine. But what you can imagine, if you now focus on the present, is okay, I might not be able to do that, but tonight I have some free time. Maybe tonight I will understand what exactly is happening in Yemen. So I am unsure whether the future will go as planned, but if the future is too overwhelming, focus on the present and realize the things that you can control in the present, so that every single day you can be mindful. And what that mindfulness do is you can begin solving it one by one. So again, when the present is too overwhelming, see the future and put things in the perspective of time and the length of time that you have. When the future becomes too heavy and too uncertain, take a look at the things that you can control in the present. So it's always about that dual narrative. But secondly, it's also about moving on. My journey together with Ilham, I mean, I guess we are blessed to a certain extent. We are quite blessed. Every tournament that I join with Ilham, with the exception of ABP, but in ABP, I think we break an Indonesian record. We become the first ITB team to enter the open quarter, and we are only among the 4 people to ever enter the open quarter from Indonesia. So so generally every tournament that I went together with Ilham, it was pretty successful. But there are times in practices and there are times in tournaments where it's not as successful. I joined an open tournament. I didn't join with Ilham because Ilham was busy at that time. I joined the Founders Trophy and I lost in the quarters, right? So that's bad in the sense that prior to that, in Atma Open that year, in JDF, in Ganesha Open, we always make it to the finals. We either, in all the tournaments that we join, we either win or we make it to the finals. And for me to take a loss in that quarter, that hits hard. But that's the thing. You need to be able to move on from your losses. Your losses do not define you. It will only define you if you choose to make it define you. What I did is I take my lesson from that tournament. I realized that why is it that I'm not performing as well? Because apparently in that particular Founders Trophy, all the motion are classic motion. I am benefited if the motions are new motion because I happen to know a lot about new stuffs that people don't know. But if it's classic motions that everyone have had practice on, that benefit disappear. So I take the lesson from that tournament. I need to upgrade my ability in classic motions as well. Again, move on from your losses. Don't let it define you. Study your losses. Understand what you can do to improve and to do better. And after you have done that, move on. It's no longer relevant. It doesn't have any power over you, right? Take what you can, let the rest go. So that's unhealthy mentality for me.
Okay, that sounds very inspiring, but I'm sure it's pretty hard to do, and we need to keep on reminding ourselves to be mindful and to let go and to not let your losers dictate you. I think it has been a quite long but a very inspiring session with PM. So thank you so much, PM, for sharing those plans with us. And yeah, I hope this session is useful for you guys who's preparing for a major tournaments like JOVED, and we hope to see you in JOVED.
Yeah. One more thing.
Yeah.
So this is part of a preparation. This is Road to JOVED. So in case of any of you that are interested to join JOVED, do go to the description down below. We put our social media, we put our contacts down below, and you can definitely check out our tournament. It's going to be very, very useful if you're preparing for major tournaments such as future NUDC or future Worlds. We hope to see you there. And we're going to also put more debate tips inside of our social media as well. So do give us a follow if you like our content. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. We hope to see you in JOVED. Bye bye.